Thanks, Catherine, and thank you to Catherine Thomas for doing the captions for this session. So my name's Ian, and I'm here with Amanda, Mariah, and Casey to speak with you all today. We are students at the University of Michigan studying user experience research and design. So I would like to welcome everyone to the dark side. I would do my best Darth Vader impression, but it's frankly not a good time to sound sick right now. Seriously though, I hope everyone is staying healthy and able to work from home and to do some good social distancing. To those of you who are familiar with the field of usability and user experience, welcome back. If you haven't heard of user experience or UX, we'll have a primer for you before we get into the dark side of things. So I do have an unfortunate announcement to make. We had originally planned this as a more interactive session with cookies and a back and forth with you all, but things are going to be a little different today as we are virtually holding this. So to make up for the lack of audience participation, we are using Slido, a tool that allows you to ask questions of us and lets us have some interaction with you all. It doesn't require an account to join, so please enter our meeting code, #MidCamp, at sli.do. I'll give you a couple moments to get that up or just to stare at these delicious cookies. So before we start, I'm going to talk about what user experience or UX is, and the Slido details are still on this page. So please take a moment to think about something you enjoy using, whether that be a software experience or a physical product experience. Please let us know in Slido what you think of. I'll give you a minute with some music. All right, thanks everyone for your answers. I'm seeing a lot of software here. I saw briefly the Delta website, which I hope it's working these days. So all of these are pretty good user experiences. Toaster, good example, really simple, works like you expect it to. So one of my favorite experiences is a feature that I wasn't expecting and really impressed me the first time I used it. It's Apple's Wi-Fi password sharing, and it's such a small feature, yet it saves time and hassle when people don't know their Wi-Fi password. If you haven't used it, if you're trying to get onto a network and you're near a contact of yours that is already on that network, they can share the password to you so they don't have to find it and you don't have to find it. It's great for coffee shops or a home network environment. So these positive experiences can happen outside of software as well. Another favorite of mine is using digital Fujifilm cameras for photography. They have such a familiar feel whenever I pick one up and start photographing with it. Everything is exactly where I think it should be, with the controls and dials all easily laid out in a way it can use them without looking at the camera. So the experience of using this camera and all those good experiences you thought of were intentionally designed in some way for people to use. The reason some of you may like a particular experience is that it is simply easy to use. It could be argued that the best user experience is one that you don't notice at all. Like an easy checkout process, not that I need a new camera, a good maps application, but basically anything that works like you expect it to. This is all good UX. And whether you notice it or not, UX is there to help get things done. So the Nielsen-Norman Group, a well-known user experience organization, defines UX as encompassing all aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. Anything we experience can be designed, as long as the person doing the designing understands how the end user thinks about things. In our industry, we use the term human-centered design to indicate our goal of making experiences that revolve around how we, as people, think about doing things. As Nielsen and Norman pointed out, this can cover software, hardware, services, and even how people get information in buildings and public spaces. In its simplest form, UX means, does this thing work like I expect it to work? So, how does good user experience happen? Ideally, when a product is being designed for the first time, that product is based on an actual user need. A UX researcher or designer would be integrated into the design process to better understand the needs the user has and to make recommendations for project direction based on those needs. All of that is to understand the mental model of the user, so the product can work exactly like the user intends. But as soon as your product doesn't work as intended, the user might get frustrated. And if a competitor is doing their UX better, that user might switch platforms based on that experience alone. But back to designing the product. Once the mental model of the user is understood, the product can be made to match that model. However, this can get complicated when you have many types of users. So some systems get built on commonalities between many types of stakeholders that have many differing needs. UX works to balance all those needs and to find the best way to handle them. These commonalities extend to how we all use virtual systems and interfaces. Things like a check mark to confirm something, an X to cancel something, and how certain icons are commonly understood, such as the home and wireless icons here. These are all accepted standards in many cultures around the world. So what is dark UX? You saw our punny session title and dropped in, hopefully wanting to learn more about it. Well, the dark side is everywhere, and it's been around longer than you think. Basically, dark UX is the experience when using a product that tricks, coerces, or confuses users into putting their information or money somewhere they wouldn't otherwise intend to. These experiences are created with the intent to deceive or take advantage of users. They are also known as dark patterns. Some dark UX is based on bad business practices, and when we get into specific examples, you may be reminded of situations that you've experienced outside of software. So some of you may be thinking, well, I've used some really annoying products before. How is dark UX different from bad UX? Well, annoying doesn't mean the company is trying to intentionally profit off of you or steal your information. It could just be as simple as bad design without enough thought or research put into it. So let's take a look at some examples of a type of product we likely all use, a car. Now, anyone that has jumped into an unfamiliar vehicle and failed to find something in its complicated menu system, this is bad UX. For example, this is Subaru's infotainment system, which is frustrating to use for many people for many years. Or a feature gets added that is different than how people actually want to do something, which can have a negative effect on the experience. This is the Cadillac CTS interior, which at one point was criticized for taking away knobs for controlling functions and adding touch or swipe controls only. This had safety as well as usability concerns. So there are a lot of reasons automotive user experience has been so historically poor over the years, trying to satisfy many types of customers by building on those commonalities I was talking about before, or just not having enough communication between the teams working on these complex projects. So last example, this is the interior of a Ford Mustang, which at one point had an on-screen set of climate controls, which is doubled up right on top of the physical climate controls. But none of these design decisions were malicious. They all just negatively impacted the user experience. Thankfully, we're starting to see a positive change in the UX in vehicles being released today. So a more humorous example of bad UX is this: frustrating phone number inputs. A variety of reasons could have caused all of these frustrating information entry experiences to happen in the real world. Thankfully, with something as simple as a phone number input, we worked through a solution that works a long time ago, and we don't have to draw out our phone numbers, go through annoying dropdowns, or play number entry roulette. Or some of my favorite intentionally bad user experiences on the internet, the most frustrating volume sliders you could think of. Just take a moment. They're all annoying and they're all in their individual way. But simply, bad UX happens all the time. It is, mostly, an accident with no malicious intent behind it. But this happens by not understanding the user. But dark UX occurs when the company understands how the user thinks and acts on that for their own profit. The commonalities I mentioned before, between users, between cultures, and in the interfaces we all use, can be leveraged against us. So finally, here are some of the types of dark UX that have found their way into products we all know and interact with. I'll turn this over to Amanda now.
Thank you so much, Ian, for that wonderful explanation of a little bit more about what UX is, as well as an explanation of dark UX. With that, I'm going to start getting into some of the specific types of patterns that we see out and about on the internet every day. So the first one that I have for you today is called trick questions, which sounds pretty self-explanatory, but it's definitely one of the more common dark UX patterns that we see every day. So this happens when you are filling in a form and you respond to a question that seems to be asking you one thing upon a first glance, but then when you take a second look, it's actually asking you something else entirely. A very common example of this is filling in different forms about subscriptions. So for instance, this screenshot from the Royal Mail and Post Office appears to be that when you click on the different boxes next to post, telephone, and email, you will receive notifications. Most people, when just going through a form like this, would probably just scroll right past this, saying, you know, I don't want to receive any more emails. I already get enough of those. But upon a second glance, you see that there's actually opt-out language buried in this long paragraph of text. So most people will probably miss this, and it probably won't be earth-shattering for them. They might receive a few extra emails that they didn't want to, or they might get some mail that they can recycle later. But you can see how this could be something a lot more detrimental if, for instance, there's a financial contribution involved. The next one I have is called sneak into basket. So this happens when you're trying to purchase something on a website, but somewhere along the line, the site sneaks an extra item into your basket. Perhaps it's through the use of an opt-out button, or if the site just makes it really easy for the person to accidentally upgrade or purchase something that they didn't intend to. So take booking tickets on delta.com. When you're going through to purchase a basic economy seat, you'll come to this page that you can see on the screen that says review your choice. It tells you for an additional $50, you can upgrade to the main cabin, and then it gives you a huge red button that says move to main cabin with a tiny little bit of text at the bottom that allows you to continue with your original choice. Perhaps a better way that Delta could have designed this would be to swap those two things. So make the big red button be to help the user go on with the choice that they had wanted originally, or even for them to have two similarly sized buttons, forcing the user to make a conscious decision. In this way, it puts autonomy back into the hands of the users, and it doesn't really force them to buy something that they hadn't originally intended to. The next one I have is Roach Motel. So this is when you get into a situation really easily, but then when you actually go to unsubscribe or get out of that situation, it's really difficult for you to do so. So the New York Times is pretty infamous for doing this, and you can see in the screenshots on the right, they say that they offer several ways to cancel your subscription. But you can see from the frustrated text messages on the right that the person trying to cancel their subscription is trying to get in touch with a customer care advocate, and it's taking them nearly 8 hours to get someone to respond to them. So this is putting a lot of undue burden on the user. It's making it hard for them to do something simple, just like unsubscribe from a newsletter or cancel a subscription that they don't want to pay money for anymore. Perhaps the New York Times could have implemented a one-click unsubscribe or cancel option, removing some burden from the user and making their lives a lot easier. The next one I have is called privacy zuckering. This is one of the more, I guess, dangerous patterns that we see just out and about on the internet every day. So for instance, Facebook is a really good example of this. This is when you're tricked into sharing more information about yourself than you really wanted to. And I'm sure that we've all heard just the different things in the news about Facebook and how they're handling issues like data privacy and security. This is such a good example, in fact, that this dark pattern was actually named after the CEO, Mark Zuckerberg. Anyway, this type of dark pattern can expand to other things such as transparency around data use and our privacy as well. So another point of contention with privacy zuckering is the use of our data for targeted advertising. So generally, data is collected about us to send out targeted advertising through something called cookies, which is what your web browser can use to collect personal data about you. On the screen here, I have two different examples of websites that are using cookies in different ways. So I have the Loft on the left, which has a box here that says our website uses cookies to personalize your experience. Well, they're telling you why they need the data and how they're going to use it. And they also tell you a little bit more about how that will be used, and you can go in through a link that says Manage Preferences to perhaps opt out of this or at least learn more about how your data will be used on their site and if it's going to be sold. On the right-hand side, in strong opposition to that, is the SE website. It just says cookies help us improve your website experiences. If you want to use this website, you have to consent to the use of your cookies, and there's a confirm button. There's no way to X out of it, and there's no way to learn more about how your data is being used or an option to opt out. So anyway, there is definitely a difference in the way that Loft and SE are handling cookies in the situation, and Loft is placing a lot more autonomy back into the hands of the users in regards to their data privacy. The next one I have is called price comparison prevention, and I have yet another airline example here. So this is when the retailer makes it difficult for you to compare prices of items, impairing your informed decision-making ability. So here I have an example from British Airways, where you can see that there is an option for basic versus plus. In the basic, it says that you can choose your seat for a fee or check a bag for a fee, but it doesn't tell you how much that fee will be. Perhaps it would be a little bit easier for the user if British Airways had put all the information that they needed to make an informed decision in the side-by-side comparison chart. Even though you are able to find out what those fees are later on in the funnel, it would be a lot easier for the user to make a decision and understand which cabin is the best choice for them. We also see this in slightly more innocuous situations as well. So take Sainsbury's, which is a website, a grocer in the UK. It has two different types of apples side by side, and one is priced in kilograms, the other is priced in units. Even though the user can probably figure out which one of these will be more expensive based on the information that's given here, it would be a lot easier for them if they could go through their grocery shopping without needing to do mental math to figure out which one costs more. So just making it a little bit easier on the user, removing some of that cognitive burden and letting them not jump through hoops to do their grocery shopping. The next one I have is called Misdirection. So this is when a design purposely focuses your attention on one thing to distract you from another thing. So during the Skype setup, during the wizard, when you're setting up your Skype, you may have experienced where you're rushing to a meeting and you're trying to just set this up really quickly and you're not really paying attention to what's going on. So you might not notice that during the process, it makes Bing and MSN your defaults. Most users will not notice this, and it may not have been what they intended. By putting this in a more salient place, perhaps once you're done rushing through the wizard to get to your meeting, it puts autonomy back in the hands of the user and makes it a little bit easier for them to avoid making decisions they wouldn't have otherwise. So the last one that I have for you today is called friend spam. So this is when a product asks you for your email or other permissions under the guise of desirable outcomes. It says that it will find you friends, but then it spams all your contacts in a message that says it's from you. This is LinkedIn. They actually were facing a class action lawsuit and ended up paying out over $13 million a few years ago over the use of this dark pattern. So in this instance, LinkedIn has you enter your email address for you to set up your profile, saying that it will import your address book to help suggest connections for you and help you find friends on the site. It doesn't tell you that it will send out emails to perhaps all of the people you've ever interacted with within this email address. So people were having issues with potentially hundreds of people that they had interacted with over the years, being sent emails, leading to personal and professional embarrassment. Thankfully, LinkedIn doesn't do this anymore because of the lawsuit that I mentioned earlier, but it's still something that we see on smaller websites, especially things like dating sites. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mariah to talk about some more dark patterns.
Thanks, Amanda. So unfortunately, but maybe fortunately for this presentation, there are still more UX dark patterns. So I'll be picking up where Amanda left off here. Hidden costs is another UX dark pattern. This one is pretty self-explanatory, and it's probably something that we've all experienced. You're about to check out, and then finally, in the last steps of the process, you're hit with some extra fines or fees, which probably don't have any explanation. So here's one example of this. Back in December, when we actually paid money to be stuck inside a room, I was booking an escape room in Portland, Oregon for a group of friends. To start this booking process, I selected the number of tickets that I wanted. As the top image on this slide shows, I have one ticket, and there's a description under the word ticket saying that it's $35 each. When I went to finalize the booking, I was hit with a screen similar to the one on the bottom. The second image here shows an itemized list of my purchase. The tickets are listed for $35, and then there's something marked taxes and fees for an additional $312 per ticket. The magic tax appeared, and it was added to my total during the final step of the booking process. It's also important to note in this situation that Oregon has no sales tax, so that wasn't an explanation for this. There actually wasn't an explanation for this. And so that is an example of the hidden cost dark pattern. The next dark pattern that we have is one that I named, though another name for it probably exists out there somewhere. And I call it the final countdown because that's what websites use to pressure you into thinking that time is running out. This creates a sense of perceived scarcity among buyers. And it's a common tactic, especially with travel sites, like the example of booking.com that we see here. In the top image, there's a booking that no longer exists. The image says, "You missed it. Our dates are popular and we've run out of rooms." So even though this hotel location, that's what that is no longer available, the website chose to display it anyway because they want you to know what you missed out on. And then in the bottom image, there is a warning in red text that lets you know the number of bookings is limited, so you better act fast. Other online retailers outside the travel industry also use this. Etsy, which is an e-commerce website for crafts, also uses this strategy, which is not somewhere I necessarily expect to find that dark UX. Bait and switch is a UX dark pattern that actually originated in marketing. It's described as when you set out to do one thing, but a different, undesirable thing happens instead. An example of this is if you go to purchase something, but when you try, you're offered a different thing at a higher cost instead. So the example that I have here is the screen from TurboTax, because my friend recently mentioned the experience she had when she was trying to file her taxes. So as she was towards the end of the process, she was suddenly hit with a screen that said, "You're less than a minute away, but okay, let's get your free credit score and report. This won't hurt your score." And then it asks for personal information such as street address and apartment, suite, and other things like that. So this is an example here of privacy zuckering as well as bait and switch, because the TurboTax application is asking for information that it doesn't necessarily need and is not related to the process of completing your taxes. My friend, when she was taking part in tax filing, just wanted to get the process done. She didn't want to have her credit score and report as part of this process. So confirm shaming is our next example here, and it's a fun example of how dark UX directly tries to emotionally manipulate you by guilting users into opting into something. And they do this by including a decline option that's worded in such a way that you're more likely to just agree and confirm to what they're asking rather than to reject the offer. One example of this is Wikipedia around the holiday times. They post large banners as requests every time you land on the site that ask you to donate. And so in this top image here, which asks the user for a donation, they actually don't include a decline button at all. The users just offered two payment options, one for credit card and another for PayPal, even though a donation isn't actually mandatory. The second image here is an example of one of those forced email subscriptions that tries to sign you up for a mailing list. In this case, the mailing list is the Free Beginner's Garden Guide. There's a text box for an email address and a big red button that says, "Get your free guide." You can see at the bottom, there's a small text saying, "No thanks, I know everything about gardening." Not only is it tiny and easy to miss, but it's worded as a flippant response, which makes you more likely to do the polite thing and subscribe. If you've ever played a game on a website or a mobile device, or navigated to a download page for some software, you've probably run into disguised ads. These are a UX dark pattern because they're designed to look like something that would make sense on the page, like a download button. But if you look closer, they're actually an advertisement, and clicking one will redirect you to who knows where. So recently, I was trying to install PG Admin, and you can see in this image on the screen, on the left-hand side, there's actually the correct download button for the application, but then on the right-hand side, there's a big green Start Now button. If you were to hover over that button, you would see that it actually says Add Choices, and clicking on it would redirect you somewhere else. It's an advertisement, but it doesn't look like it maybe to the unsuspecting user who could click on it thinking that they're downloading the software that they intended to. So this is a disguised ad. Another UX dark pattern that we've probably all fallen victim to at one time or another is forced continuity. Maybe you didn't know the name for it, because I didn't know the name for it either before I came to the dark side. This strategy is used by businesses who have lured you in with a free or discounted trial, but with the catch that you'll pay full price for the service after a certain time period elapses. This means the dreaded entering of your credit card number upon signing up. And of course, they are unlikely to remind you when your free or reduced trial period ends. Audible, Amazon Prime, and Spotify Premium Student are subscription services that are likely to catch you with this at some point. I most recently went through this battle with Spotify in December when they told me that my student account was expiring because my 4 years were up. And this is when I learned that Spotify hates grad students. Even if you enter another email address, like my new valid UMich email address on that same account, their policy is apparently that you can only be a student for 4 years. But the point here is, subscription services especially love to trap you with forced continuity. Once you're on a trial period of a service, there's a good chance that they can get you to pay the full price for the service after all. So we have one final dark pattern here for you today before we transition to something a little bit more interactive. This dark pattern is called irrelevant notification overload, and sites like LinkedIn and Facebook are notorious for doing this. With this dark pattern, the product attempts to lure you back into the application with that little red notification icon by updating you about information that doesn't actually matter to you. So the image on the screen right now is a snippet of my recent notification feed on LinkedIn. I received notifications for things like Google being mentioned in the news for offering a new product bundle, or a topic that is trending now titled, "Helping Other Job Seekers Can Pay Big Dividends." So these notifications didn't really have anything to do with me at all, or my network of connections on LinkedIn. But applications use this dark pattern because they know that by getting you to respond to a notification, by entering the app, they're more likely to keep you engaged. And so with that, we are now going to give you a chance to use your new knowledge. And so on Slido, again, that's sli.do. If you enter the code #MidCamp, you should be able to pretty shortly participate in a little activity that we have for you all here today. So we are calling this little game an example of what type of dark UX is this. So what we're going to do is, for a few different examples of dark UX, provide you with a description and an image, and then ask you to vote on what you think your answer is through Slido. So in this case, this is a product that leads you through a lengthy process of inputting your desired parameters for an apartment. And then it requires you to enter your email, your name, phone number, and agree to be contacted by third parties before you can view matches. So right about now, you should be able to see the poll voting on Slido, and go ahead and select what you think, what type of dark UX you think this is. All right, so it looks like we got 32 responses, and the majority of people said privacy Zuckering. We think that that one actually does best describe what situation this is. because you are basically being forced to hand out your information, and then third parties are going to receive it, which is not necessarily what you wanted to do when you were trying to look for an apartment, but suddenly your information is being given out to all of these other people. So good job. Bait and switch also seems like it could be possibly an argument for that dark pattern here too. All right, now moving on to the next one here. This is a website with an unsubscribe feature that isn't the worst ever, but it does hide the confirmation that you've opted out in a paragraph of text. So Redbubble says, "You have successfully opted out. We'll no longer send you delightful, life-affirming, money-saving marketing emails. To resubscribe, click the opt back in button below." And the opt back in button is the prominent feature on the page, which makes users who are already in a hurry or not reading carefully likely to click it. So the poll should be enabled now, and go ahead and vote for what type of dark UX you think this is. Great, okay. Looks like we had 33 people respond, and the majority said misdirection. I can see also why this would be potentially confirm shaming based on the way that they worded their like description. But misdirection is what we were thinking here primarily, because they sort of disguised the fact that you have already unsubscribed and then have that big opt back in button, which if the user is going to unsubscribe somewhere, they're more likely to think that they're going to click something to unsubscribe than the fact that the page already unsubscribed them, and they may end up opting back in by accident. So now for our third question for you here. If you turn off your notifications on Instagram, the app bothers you to turn them back on again and again with a pop-up window like the one on the right here, which says turn on notifications, know right away when people follow you or like or comment on your photos. Then there's an option to turn on or not now. So even if disabled notifications are what the user wants, they are constantly reminded of their choice. So you should right now be able to see a poll and submit your vote. All right, let's see. It looks like we have confirm shaming is our leading example here, and that is correct. The fact that the user has already said that they want to opt out or want to disable their notifications, but Instagram keeps bothering them over and over again, trying to get them to change their mind, is an example of what we consider confirm shaming. So we have one last example for you today. This is a website that is attempting to pressure its shoppers into making a purchase based on the perceived scarcity of an item. So you can see in the image that there is an item for sale, and below it there is text that says only 3 available, and it's in more than 20 people's carts. So you should just now be able to see a poll that allows you to vote on our fourth and final dark UX question. All right, and it looks like 100% of people got the final countdown, and that is definitely correct. The website, this was Etsy, is actually trying to instill a sense of urgency and perceived scarcity with its users by pressuring them into making them think that a bunch of people have it in their carts, whether they do or not. And this might lead to more buying than if that text was not there. So great job with reviewing those. And now I'm going to hand it off to Casey, and she's going to talk about how to spread awareness of dark UX.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So we've seen some common examples of dark UX in practice, and you might be wondering why it is still seen so frequently. Oftentimes, dark UX practices are implemented as a result of shady business practices that try to manipulate users. In some cases, however, the intention behind the user experience is not meant to be harmful. Sometimes dark UX is implemented due to lack of attention or insufficient user testing that informs a designer of the impact of their choices. And this idea can be explained by Hanlon's razor, which is a philosophical concept that provides the mental model as shown in the next slide. Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. To rephrase that, UX that might seem harmful might not always be intended to. Sometimes designs that follow dark UX patterns are due to bad design. We should remember that humans are prone to error and can't get everything right the first time around. And we see this all the time in the media with fake news. For example, users were outraged with YouTube's content policies where videos with LGBTQ+ content were filtered to restrictive viewing. But this was an algorithm error on YouTube's part and not meant to be harmful. So what is being done? The UX industry and research institutions are making efforts to explain what dark UX is, as well as bring awareness to dark UX patterns. We've included a few examples of what others are doing to mitigate the usage of dark UX. As we can see from some of these sources, dark patterns have been around for a long time. The Verge published an article back in 2013 to bring awareness to the topic, yet it is still widespread across business practices. In recent years, though, many efforts have been made to mitigate the usage of dark patterns. As of April 2019, senators in Virginia and Nebraska have passed bills that forbid the usage of dark patterns to trick users. A draft of the bill notes that it is illegal for large public online services of more than 100 million monthly active users to design, modify, or manipulate a user interface with the purpose or substantial effect of obscuring, subverting, or impairing user autonomy, decision-making, or choice to obtain consent or user data. So dark UX is more prevalent than you might think. But what can we do on our part? The best way to avoid being trapped by dark UX patterns is to spread awareness about them. Spreading awareness will help others identify patterns more easily, which can lead to actions taken against these practices. First and foremost, your users. These are the people that you should be most concerned about, as they are directly impacted by dark UX practices. It is important to assess their user experience. And if they express something that doesn't feel right, it might be an indicator of dark UX patterns. As people who aim to deliver good user experiences, we should be cognizant of how our design choices influence the spread of dark patterns. If you were a designer in industry, for example, you might be asked to work on a feature that aligns with the dark pattern. Before taking on this work, it is important to ask why this feature is being implemented in this way. Pointing to the research surrounding the topic to provide a backing for your argument will be very helpful. Dark patterns are not meant to be in favor of the user. We want to ensure that our users are satisfied. Users are long-term users, and unhappy users are short-term users. Happy users will result in long-term user engagement. And next, what you can do for yourself. Apart from your users, being aware of how you as a user can be affected by dark patterns is essential. You should be aware of situations and scenarios that feel dark UX-y. You can start by identifying patterns that we discussed earlier, or by doing your own research about what other patterns exist and examples of where they're being implemented. And if you don't feel comfortable about a situation that involves dark UX, try to get out of that situation. As a user, it is also important to be aware of how your information is being handled. You should keep note of where your data goes and what it is used for, and how your money is being handled. For the sake of user privacy, it is important to voice these concerns and stay protected. And lastly, staying informed and updated. There are tons of resources on the internet that talk about dark patterns, such as UX Twitter feeds, Reddit forums on UX design podcasts, and many more. And finally, what you can do for friends and family. For your friends and family, assuring them that dark UX is real, and it might appear more than they might think, and it's typically a result of shady business strategies. Making sure that they're aware of the impact of dark UX can protect them from potentially harmful consequences regarding their personal data. One way to inform your friends and family is by talking about the dark patterns that you've learned about in the talk and that you've come across. They might be able to relate to certain situations or realize that they're in a situation with similar practices. And lastly, sharing resources with them to help them stay updated. For example, sharing this talk, or sharing some of the other resources that we've mentioned, Reddit forums, darkpatterns.org, Twitter hashtags, and etc. And thanks for listening to our presentation. We hope you've learned more about the dark side.
So now we're open to take questions. You can either post them in the chat here, which we're monitoring, as well as the Slido. We had one question from Mariah earlier, which was, did you ask them about the tax and fee for the escape room? Did you book it anyway, or did it cause that you just walk away from it?
That's a good question. So yeah, when I was booking, I was actually booking for 6 people, I think. So the tax and fee was actually more significant than the $3.12. Because the time frame that I was working with was pretty limited, I did just go ahead and book it. I didn't try and track down. I did look on the website to see if there was an explanation for it. I couldn't find one, so I didn't want to try and track down contact info and email or call, so I ended up just booking it. But if I'd had more time and maybe if I had cared a lot more, then I could have potentially either just not chosen to go through with the booking or tried to seek out that information.
So I'm seeing a couple more in Slido. First one is, will you FedEx us cookies? Unfortunately, not. But you're more than welcome to bring your own, as someone else suggested in the chat. The second question is, how do you balance the business needs for dark UX? Casey cut out for just a second when she was talking about this, but there's a trade-off between short-term users and long-term users. If you implement a dark UX practice for the sake of making money, and users end up not liking it, you might lose that user for the duration of that you're working on that product. Whereas if you might do another thing, you might not have as much immediate payback from it, but you might have just created a lifelong user who respects what you're doing with the product and who respects what your organization is doing. More broadly though, I talk about this a lot, like UX does need to have an idea of the business need in mind when you are designing. But that doesn't always mean that you have to go to doing something like a dark pattern to achieve the goal. Someone asked, do you have any statistics on the percentage of users that actually care about this? Off the top of my head, no. This is a very product by product based thing. I would say, turn this back and ask, when have you been frustrated by something like this? Is it is something you want to keep doing? Are you annoyed if you try a free trial of something and it ends up charging your credit card, and then 1 or 2 months later you actually look and notice it? So we know some of these things are frustrating, and some of the research we linked may have some broader user studies, but off the top of my head, I don't have an answer for you. Someone asked, do you have a job in the fall? That's a separate question. Will you bake cookies for next year's MidCamp? Yes, if I present at next year's MidCamp, I will definitely be bringing cookies with me to make up for this year's. Yeah, someone mentioned that they stopped using Facebook and that their model is based on a lot of dark UX. That's entirely true. I have also stopped using Facebook. It bothered me to the point where I finally didn't want to put up with it anymore. But a lot of their practices are just not great across the board. Another app that's really kind of bad about this is Uber. I mean, both on the user side and the driver side, for some time, they had some pretty negative business practices in place. And it's, of course, they have a constant balance of trying to make money and trying to, make sure people want to use their app. But unfortunately, some of that has led to them, kind of mistreating their drivers for some time, and trying to find a way to constantly kind of cheat them out of the amount of money they think they'll be making. So. All right. I can keep answering the questions unless somebody else wants to jump in.
If you're doing a good job, Ian.
All right. So will Facebook be illegal in Nebraska now? I actually don't know. Can you write a little more in the chat about what's going on there? And then someone asked, are there any good examples of companies that avoid dark UX? Maybe companies have a pay-to-service model and do not have to resort to tricks. That is a good question. Pay-for-service models without dark UX. In terms of like big companies, that gets tough. I think you have smaller instances of companies that are definitely trying to do the right thing. The problem is like a lot of companies that offer something like a free service are trying to find another way to make money. So a lot of the apps you use and everything else that might be free or look free up front aren't inherently free by the end of the day, because they're trying to get your information, and learn from you and your trends, or you or your data, and do something from it, and they can profit off of that. But I have to think a little bit more about companies that are avoiding dark UX that are actually doing it well, mostly because a lot of the time you see the companies that are actually engaging in these practices. I don't know if this is necessarily dark UX, but I use Adobe products a lot. Love them for the most part. They have their quirks. They get the job done. I've been using Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign for years. But when they switched to a subscription model, they basically forced an entire industry to start doing that. And that's not necessarily an example of forced continuity, but it's kind of like a dark business practice to say, hey, I'm just going to go in here and make an entire worldwide designers to have to pay for this to keep using it and to keep having the updates they're going to want to use. So yeah, I'd say it's actually kind of, hard to find companies that are fully avoiding this. All right, for all the presenters, which is your favorite dark pattern? I'll let someone else start this.
I guess that's hard because like favorite in the sense that like it catches me the most, and so I'm like, oh yep, that one is here again to fool me, or just favorite as far as like the name. I'm kind of biased towards Final Countdown for the name, because that's just something that I know exists out there, and so I tried to think of like what would describe it as far as a good name. So that was my name for this one. So I have to say probably that. But otherwise, the one that probably like trips me up the most, that I can appreciate more in doing this presentation, I think I would say forced continuity. That's the one where they trick you into paying for like the full price of a service after you've signed up for a free or reduced trial period. Because I've had to put in my calendar so many times, like, okay, my Audible subscription is set to expire or upgrade on this date. I need to make sure that I cancel it. Otherwise, I'm going to be paying more. So that's probably my least favorite pattern.
Yeah, I would also say that forced continuity always gets me the most. And I also do the thing where I have it in my calendar, make sure to cancel the subscription, make sure you know that your trial is ending. But I think the one that annoys me the most is probably sneak into basket, like the example with Delta. Like that happens every single time I book a ticket, and it is so frustrating, and it's still there, and it's just something we have to deal with. But being aware of it is helpful.
I would say for me, it's confirm shaming. Just because it's so common, I feel like every time I visit an internet site, there's that pop-up trying to get you to subscribe. There's always something in the bottom corner like, okay, I don't want to receive life-affirming emails. And I'm like, oh, I guess that's, maybe I should actually subscribe then, but it's definitely a dark pattern.
I have to jump in and say privacy zuckering. Name aside, which is fantastic. It's an issue that's becoming more and more kind of present in the public conscience, I think. So I think people are beginning to think a lot more about what privacy means online. And I think it's a pretty fun one to talk about for that reason, because there's a lot of just stuff happening in that space. And the internet has been a fantastic, innovative place for a lot of things over the years, but a lot of development happened that wasn't forward thinking about how some of this information to be used. So, and to go back to a previous question that someone had about companies that avoid dark UX, I'd say like, I was just like thinking around and looking at my iPad for some stuff, and like apps that you have that are just single payment apps like Procreate, if any of you are sketchers or artists out there, is great because you pay for it once, they continue updating it, they don't guilt you into anything else, they don't have any like subscriptions to remove ads, it's just a one-time payment and it's done. So that's like good in the fact that it's lacking any of the other dark UX patterns. All right. I'm seeing some people talking about avoiding free trials. Something called privacy.com is a good solution when signing up for free subscriptions. I know, also, I don't know how this would interact with free subscriptions down the line, but there were some credit card companies that were proposing using like temporary card numbers for stuff. So you could like, if there was a trial you didn't want to continue, you could like set up a temporary card number and then it would just, you know, bounce. But that's a whole separate conversation. Well, I think we only have about a couple minutes left before we should get out of the room and let the next people prep. So I wanted to thank you all for listening to this today and hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions here at MidCamp. Also, yes, feedback slide. And then there's contribution day, Saturday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So don't forget about that. All right, thanks everyone.